Welcome back to Hey Now. I wanted to discuss Sony versus Canon since I'm seeing a lot of videos of people leaving Canon for Sony, which I don't get myself because I own both systems and honestly, I like Canon a lot more. And I'm going to tell you the reasons why versus Sony of why I think Canon is just a better system overall. I know my Sony a7S III is a 12 megapixel camera, but I have shot on the Sony a7R5. I ordered it, tried it, and I honestly didn't see much of a difference between these two cameras when it comes to the resolution. Um, I was doing shots of my kitchen, and it just when I zoomed in with both the A7S III, it was the same. It might be bigger as for doing like posters, but as for just the image itself, they're the same. And I'm guessing that it's probably the same case with the A1 being 50 megapixels. Um, but when I look at Canon, when I shoot the same thing, if I do the same pictures, whether, especially low light, in low light, I can't go past 5,000 with my A7S III until it just gets noisy. It doesn't look good. It's falling apart, right? I can literally go up to 8,000, sometimes 10,000 with the R5, and it still looks great. When I get up to about 12,800, I'm starting to see it kind of fall apart, and that's pretty amazing for photography, shooting in low light like that. So it does depend on the scene. Like I was doing this Peter Pan play a couple weeks back, and a lot of the shots I had to get up to 8,000. It was difficult because the kids are moving around, and I had my shutter speed at like 250 so that they wouldn't blur. So I really couldn't. I was doing like 6,400, 8,000, and I was still getting really, really amazing shots, just super clear. And I think some of that has to do with the IBIS. So that being said, leading into my next point between these systems is I was impressed with the active stabilization on the A7S III when I first got it, but that was me coming from an A7 III. And the A7 III just had terrible IBIS. It just sucked. I mean, it was basically like you didn't have any, right? Um, but the A7S III was better. But it's still not good. Like there's micro jitters, and I can't do walking shots with it. Even if I'm doing ninja, I see people on YouTube, and it's like you must have like the most amazing ninja walk, flattest feet to be able to do that shot, because I've literally tried and tried and tried, and it's just there's always micro jitters every time, right? And it's very difficult. Um, that being said, that's on like a 28 to 75 Tamron, so I know that's not wide, but even when I had like a 24 millimeter lens, it still gave me that still kind of micro jitters, right? It was a little bit better. My 17 to 28, same thing. Even on the 17 side, it's not it's not that smooth, right? So when I first got the Canon R5, I thought, oh, well, it's not going to have the greatest IBIS. There's no way. Like everybody's lying on YouTube. But I'm blown away. I mean, this thing, there's times where I walk with it that it looks like a gimbal. It's so smooth. And I can do a lot of handheld shots. I will get that jerk once in a while, just depending. So I have to be very careful of that. But I'll take that jerk over micro jitters any day. And another thing, like I was in Oregon last summer, and I brought this camera, and one of my friends grabbed it. He's not even a camera guy, and he was doing something really quick with it. And him not even being a camera guy was like, damn, dude, this is like so smooth when I walk with it. So that in itself, the IBIS in this camera is awesome. So the one thing I will say that the Sony a7S III does have over the Canon R5, and it's just by a little. I know Gerald Undone, is rated this camera 11 stops. Sony a7S III is 14, right? But where the only issue that I have with this camera is it could be a little bit difficult on the highlights where it'll clip, but it's not bad if I'm in C-Log 3. I can actually get away with it. I've done shots where I'm in like pretty surprised. I was using C-Log at first, and I definitely would say that the dynamic range is not as good on the highlights. So if you are going to shoot with Canon, whether it's the R5, R8, R6, R6 Mark II, make sure you shoot in C-Log 3 for the highlights. You'll get better highlights. It offers at least one more stop of dynamic range, and I see that, right? Plus, it's easier to color grade. I can actually use the same LUTs that I use on my a7S III, and they look good on both, right? And it gets pretty easy to match them for the most part, but their image is so different, in my opinion. I think that the Canon R5 has more of a cinema look that kind of leans more toward like their C300, C70, opposed to like the a7S III. I don't think that it looks like the Venice cameras, or I think that it still has like a mirrorless look, and that's me using the Tamron 28 to 75. But when I jump to the Nightwalker, it does look more cinema-like. But I still think that this camera looks more cinema than the a7S III. It has more of a cinema look. So the last thing that I want to talk about, which is the one biggest thing of why people leave Canon for Sony, and they all complain about the third-party lens support. So yeah, it's nice that Tamron and Sigma make lenses for Sony, but does Sony allow them to have optical stabilization in them? No. There is none of that. There's no, or image stabilization. There is none of that, right? And what's even worse is Sony barely has it. They only offer it on like their telephoto lenses, the ones where the aperture is either at 4 or it's not a fixed aperture, or let's say the 70 to 200. Okay, you're going to have it in that. But their 24 to 70 has no OSS in it, which is complete bullshit, because the micro jitters, like, that would fix it in some senses, but I have used lenses with Sony with the OSS, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So opposed to Canon, even though they don't have third-party lenses, this is the 24 to 70. This lens is incredible. It's the best $2,000 I've ever spent on a lens. It looks amazing in low light. It does this star pattern on the lights with photography. I never was able to get those kind of shots with my Sony. As for photography, I'm able to take pictures of birds. I'm able to take pictures of bees, animals, handheld. I don't need a tripod. With my Sony a7S III, whenever I used my 70 to 300, even though that thing has OSS on it, I still can never get the right shot because the IBIS sucks in these cameras. They're just terrible. So that might be different with, say, the ZV-E1 because it has that stabilization. But even with the A7R5, I really don't think you're going to be able to do handheld. You might be able to, but not like this camera. The other thing, is that every Canon lens, almost every Canon lens, right? I have a 35 millimeter 1.8, 16 millimeter I think it's a 2.8. I have the 24 to 70. All of them have stabilization. Every one of them, right? The only lens that I know of that's out there is the 50 millimeter. It's a $150 lens. There's no stabilization in it. And that's a 1.8. But all the rest do. And the stabilization with the IBIS in here, it's like gimbal. I mean, the way that you could walk with it, in my opinion, it's the best camera when it comes to stabilization. A lot of people probably going to do hate comments down below saying Lumix. I'm sorry, but I had the S5 too. I had the S5. I'm not seeing it. I'll show you footage right now of me walking with it. It's no better than my Sony a7S III, honestly. So I don't really understand when people say, oh, Lumix has the best IBIS ever. No, Canon, in my opinion, has it. And I'm talking about not from specs, I'm talking from experience with these cameras. If I leave my house and I'm gonna, go on a trip or hang out with my family or even go do client work, what is the camera that I'm gonna bring with me? I'm bringing the Canon R5. Thanks for watching.